Hi, it's Mikexingchen. There is a universal law that everyone agrees on. For whatever action, there is always the opposite reaction. This is most true in physics, but certainly applies to our daily life. For example, the butterfly effect, where it is said that in one part of the world, a butterfly would flap its wings and it would cause a devastating hurricane in the opposite side of the globe. Basically, our actions and the actions of others always have consequences to it, good or bad. It can be karmic or a domino effect, or both. And in this video, we're going to examine the actions of people that have completely changed or greatly affected history with the decisions or indecisions that they made. So here are the 10 warnings that the world ignored that completely changed the course of history. Number 10, the Great Depression. This was a really dark time in US history when the stock market crashed and sent the international community spiraling out of control, leaving thousands of people unemployed and hungry. Today's economic recession is nothing compared to the financial meltdown of 1929, and it may have been unthinkable back then because of the speed at which the US economy was accelerating in terms of industry and its economy. However, on September 5th, 1929, one man saw this great crash coming. Economist Roger Babson delivered a speech where he predicted that an impending economic crash was just around the corner. Unfortunately, the business community as well as fellow economists shrugged the warning off, claiming it to be impossible. 2 months later, over $5 billion was wiped out off the market, an amount in today's standards is beyond calculating. According to records, Babson had been warning everyone about the crash for years, and when people finally started to believe him, it was already far too late. Number 9, the sinking of the RMS Lusitania. In some sense, the sinking of the Lusitania was not unexpected. However, the events that led to this disaster are incredible enough that it lands number 9 on this list. It was at the height of the First World War, and the German submarine warfare was intensifying in the Atlantic. The Germans had declared the seas around the UK a war zone, and the German army even published several advertisements in newspapers, including the New York Times, warning the entire world the dangers of sailing on Lusitania. But in a most brash attempt, the Lusitania set sail from New York to England. Incidentally, news of the ship's departure sat side by side with the German ad in the New York Times warning people not to sail on that ship. As an exercise of caution and to avoid innocent people getting caught in the crossfire, the British government warned the captain of the Lusitania to avoid areas around the British shores where German U-boats have been known to actively patrol, and should the ship pass through those waters, the captain was strongly urged to zigzag his way through. Unfortunately for the passengers of the Lusitania, the captain ignored these warnings, so the RMS Lusitania was torpedoed by a German U-boat, taking with it the lives of 1,195 people on board. Number 8, asbestos warning. It may seem trivial to talk about the dangers of asbestos in this list, and it would also seem that it may not have had much of an impact around the world as the Great Depression, but this silent killer has slowly claimed hundreds if not thousands of lives since it was conceived in the 19th century. Known for its strength and resistance to fire, asbestos manufacturers have made a fortune selling this product to the public with no regard to its dangerous implications to an individual's health. And for nearly a century, asbestos has cropped up almost everywhere and has been used for almost anything. But there were people who were suspicious of the product since the early 1900s because of the high rates of illnesses that were reported around towns where asbestos was mined and manufactured. In 1938, due to public alarm, asbestos manufacturers commissioned a study that proved that death by the product was airborne. These same manufacturers at that time swept the undeniable link between asbestos and fatal illnesses under the rug, saying that there was no proof that links asbestos to diseases such as lung cancer. Many workers in their factories either suffered horribly from the chemicals or let go from the companies, leaving them impoverished. Today, even as a great majority of the globe has banned the use and manufacturing of asbestos, many companies still refuse to compensate their dying employees as they continue to keep a firm stand that there is nothing connecting asbestos to their employees' illnesses. Number 7, the Rwandan genocide. 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus lost their lives during a bloody ethnic cleansing and massacre that was dubbed as the Rwandan genocide. Beginning in April 6, 1994, the genocide was led by Hutu tribesmen with the objective to attack another local tribe called the Tutsis. However, not only did the Hutu plan to massacre the Tutsis, they also planned a purge of their own tribesmen who were protecting the Tutsis. It was a Belgian ambassador to Rwanda who uncovered the plot and revealed that the plan has started since at least 2 years before. Professor Philip Rentens, another Belgian, appeared appeared before the Belgian Senate and revealed that the Hutus were assembling and operating death squads to carry out the genocide, and implicated a Rwandan army colonel named Theoneste Bagasura as one of its leaders. Later on, Bagasura was found to have indeed committed the genocide. But in January 1994, 4 months before the catastrophic event, General Romeo Deller, commander of the UN troops at Rwanda, sent what is now known as the genocide fax to the United Nations, warning the organization that the Hutus, much like the revelations of the Belgian ambassador and Professor Rentens, were planning a large-scale attack on the Tutsis as well as their own tribesmen. In the fax, General Deller requested for more troops to be sent to the region in order to attack a Hutu arms cache and prevent the massacre from happening. The UN sadly ignored the plea and told the general to inform the Rwandan government instead, which was filled with the same people and officials planning the genocide. The same month, General Deller was able to seize an arms cache that was placed in the custody of the UN and Rwandan troops, the same Rwandan troops who were training the death squads and bands of rebels who directly took part in the genocide. Number 6. Fukushima meltdown. The 2011 earthquake that shook Japan left thousands homeless. The 9.0 magnitude earthquake not only rocked the country, but it also brought a giant tsunami that devastated areas near its coastlines. It may seem like it was already the worst thing that could ever happen to Japan, but what happened right after was much more sinister. Following the earthquake and tsunami was the worst nuclear accident in history since Chernobyl that no one ever expected to happen except for one man, Koji Minora. It was like a scene from a movie. Minora was investigating a reference in an ancient poem about a tsunami that happened just northeast of the country. Digging through records and historical texts, Minora discovered an account about an earthquake and tsunami that killed thousands in 869 AD, dubbed as the Jogan event. Investigating the region in the 1980s, Minora found evidence that the area was routinely destroyed by tsunami every 1,000 years, and it was already due for another one. Over the next 20 years, Minora wrote reports and produced countless studies warning about the inevitable destruction of the Fukushima area. Published in journals and magazines, his articles and research were completely ignored by his peers and by the public. And even to this day, the effects of Fukushima's nuclear power plant meltdown spreads, and reports and studies have already confirmed that the waters near and surrounding the area have dangerously lethal amounts of radiation that is slowly spreading into the northern parts of the Pacific Ocean. Number 5. The Kuwait Invasion. The early 1990s saw the rise of soaring oil prices because of unstable political situations in the Middle East, and in the morning of August 2nd, 1990, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi troops marched into the borders of neighboring Kuwait, a lightning-fast invasion with Kuwait not giving much of a fight after its head of state fled into the desert. It was reported that the plan by Iraq to invade Kuwait had been in the works 5 years beforehand, and it was said to be just the first phase of Saddam Hussein's plan, although futile, to secure Saudi Arabian oil wells in that region. The US government's refusal to take a stand against Saddam's plans only gave the dictator more fortitude to proceed with his plans, believing that he had the US on his side. When the situation spun out of hand and gained the attention of the international community, the US government stepped in, but was initially unprepared. The Iraqi forces were ejected out of Kuwait only after the US-led UN contingent landed in Kuwait, thus beginning the Gulf War. Along with 248 UN troops and 25,000 Iraqi soldiers, the largest fatality count fell on Iraqi citizens, which numbered 100,000 after the war. In the following years after the conflict, 1 million more Iraqi citizens lost their lives due to sanctions that were placed on Iraq. Number 4. Wilson's War. US President Woodrow Wilson may very well have been the catalyst that brought about the devastations of First and Second World Wars, the rise of communism in Europe, as well as the Vietnam War. The events of how the First World War began and how the US played a key part in it is numerous and is a complicated web of scenarios like a choose-your-own-adventures book. But when trouble and conflict was already brewing in Europe due to discontent from different countries and the incompetence of several generals and leaders, President Woodrow Wilson claimed the role as impartial arbitrator in order to bring the war, which has already erupted by then, to its conclusion without having to directly send US troops into battle. But when Germany and its allies seemed to be getting the upper hand, Wilson and his members of cabinet had to make a decision because they wanted victory to go to Great Britain and France. So after his presidential re-election in 1916, he ordered Congress to declare war against Germany after Germany's defeat. An armistice was created in 1918. Unfortunately for Wilson and his rhetoric, his idealism was buried by the territorial ambition ambitions of Great Britain and France after decimating Germany in the former Austro-Hungarian and Russian empires, a devastation that drove many European countries into revolution and civil war. Had Wilson not urged the US Congress to declare a war against Germany in 1917, the US may not have assumed the mantle of being the global police throughout the remainder of the 20th century. His decision therefore created a domino effect that would cost the lives of millions of people in the Second World War, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War, and not to mention 75 years of Soviet communist rule over Russia and large parts of Eastern and Central Europe. Number 3, the rise of Adolf Hitler. After Germany's defeat in the First World War, France decided to place a fine on Germany in 1919 that was so unimaginably large that had not the Second World War broken out, the country would be paying it until 2010. John Maynard Keynes, a British economist, strongly believed that it was the most effective way to get disastrous results. By absolutely crumpling the German economy with heavy sanctions, the Allied nations would no doubt trigger economic collapse on a country that was still reeling from a war. Keynes therefore lobbied governments and presented them with articles to convince them to rethink their moves, saying in almost prophetic words that if the Allies' objective is to drive Central Europe into debilitating debt and poverty, then vengeance from the subjugated nations will be reaped through revolutions and conflict. Believing that Keynes was out of his mind, his pleas and warnings were left in the dust. But true to his prediction, the German economy practically evaporated and civil unrest spread like wildfire, opening the doors to extremism. So in a small beer hall, a rejected art student by the name of Adolf Hitler decided to try his hand in politics, a decision that cost the lives of innocent millions. Number 2, World War II. The Treaty of Versailles ended the First World War in 1919. Included in the treaty was a hefty sum of money that the Allied nations imposed on Germany as restitution, and as an ulterior move in the part of the Allies was a means to make sure that Germany would not have money to declare a war of retribution. Of course, soon enough, Germany's economy collapsed and German society was destroyed by inflation and a wave of unemployment. A handful of people could see how ineffective the conditions of the treaty were. John Maynard Keynes believed the treaty held no water and was practically dead even before it was signed. Another was a French army commander, Field Marshal Ferdinand Foch. He said, "This is not peace, it is an armistice for 20 years. Foch's warning fell on deaf ears, and 20 years later, Germany lit the fires that would start the Second World War. Now formidable, the German army, as part of their campaign, invaded Paris and staged attacks in England that would leave the country and most of Europe in ruins until 1945. Finally, number 1, 9/11. In 2012, years after the tragic events of September 11th, the New York Times published the results of an investigation showing that the Bush administration in 2001 had knowledge of an impending terror attack on American soil. Far from being caught by surprise, the report states that the US government had known of the attack but chose to be tied up with bureaucracy instead of preventing it from happening. As early as June 2001, there was already intelligence that Al-Qaeda strikes on the US were imminent. The intelligence was considered a certainty and known by the CIA. However, politicians in the Pentagon refused to acknowledge the reports and dismissed it as a fabrication by Saddam Hussein, whom the US government were watching closely. According to the New York Times report, the warnings by the CIA were allegedly downplayed, and the agency was practically reduced to begging the president to take notice and take action. It was later on raised to extreme levels of urgency on June 29th, July 9th, July 24th, and August the 6th. With the government's almost obsessive watch over Iraq and Saddam Hussein and his dismissal of the constant warnings, it's therefore resulted in the worst and most deadly terrorist atrocity in the 21st century committed on American soil. So there you have it, 10 warnings that the world ignored and completely changed the course of history. Alright guys, thank you all so much for watching this video. I'll see you later.